My daughter locked me out of my own villa. Not a warning, not a conversation, just cold metal chains across the gates and a voice I barely recognized telling me I didn't belong here anymore. I stood on the gravel drive, the home I built towering behind those bars, and felt the years of sacrifice press heavy in my chest. Every brick, every tile, every tree in that garden, paid for with my sleepless nights, my empty pockets, my youth. And now she stood inside, acting like it was hers. I didn't argue. I didn't beg. I turned away, the sound of those chains rattling in the wind following me like an insult, because I knew something she didn't. In the top drawer of my desk, far away from her reach, sat the one thing she could never fake, never steal: the original property papers, with my name carved in ink that would never fade. She locked me out, but what I did next would lock her out forever. Subscribe, like, and listen closely, because this is where it begins. I built that roof over our heads brick by brick, breath by breath, and yet she stood behind a gate and called it hers. Before the chains, before the shame, there was a road of sacrifice that led straight to that door. I remember the room I started in, one bulb buzzing like an angry insect, paint curling off the walls, winter air sneaking through a cracked window. The floor smelled of damp cement. My hands smelled of machine oil and cheap soap. I would come home after double shifts, fingers numb, shoulders burning, and sit on the edge of a thin mattress, planning a home that did not exist yet. I said yes to every extra hour. I said no to small comforts. Tea without sugar, shoes glued twice instead of replaced, a coat patched at the elbow with an old towel. I learned to eat the silence between paydays. I counted coins like prayers, each one buying me a tile, a brick, a bag of cement. When the land agent took me to the edge of that hill, the wind carried the scent of eucalyptus and dust. The field looked empty to everyone else, only stones and wild grass, and a rusted gate, leaning like a tired old man. I saw bedrooms filled with light. I saw a kitchen where steam lifted with the smell of cardamom. I saw a garden where a child could run barefoot and safe. I paid in small parts. Every month, I walked to the bank with a plain envelope, my palms sweating as if that money might melt away. The clerk stamped the receipt. The red ink sank into paper like a promise. Sometimes on the way home, I would look at the slip again and again, just to make sure it was real. The first day the ground was broken, I carried water in a dented bucket. The rope burned my hands. The smell of wet soil rose thick and sweet, like new life. The mason laughed at me for lifting more than I should, but I kept going. I wanted my sweat inside those walls, a proof no one could erase. Back then, my daughter was small enough to sleep on my chest. I can still feel the weight of her head, warm and heavy, hear the tiny whistle of her breath. On Sundays I would carry her to the site. She would wave at the workers and clap at the sound of hammers. I told her, "This is ours." She smiled like the sun had heard me. Each small step was paid with something I gave up. I sold my gold ring to cover a hospital fee when she had a fever. I skipped aid clothes to buy strong doors with solid brass locks. I took the cheap bus instead of a rickshaw, my ankles swelling, so I could pay for the electrician. At night, I would trace the lines of a floor plan under a single lamp, pencil smudges on my fingers, my back aching, my hope awake. There were months when the rain came early. The roof, half done, water sneaked in and puddled on new tiles. I wiped it dry with old shirts and sat still, listening to the tap-tap of drops in the bucket. I said to myself, "Hold your nerve. A home does not rise out of comfort. It grows out of endurance." When the villa finally stood in white and glass, the sun made the windows look like sheets of silver. The first time I turned the key, the lock clicked with a clean sound I will never forget. The marble was cold under my feet. The air inside smelled of paint, lime, and beginning. I ran my hand along the wall and felt the smoothness like skin over a beating heart. I placed a table by the window, the cheap wood scarred by years of bills and notes. On that table I kept a brown file with receipts, permits, and the deed. I treated that file like a living thing. I wrapped it in plastic during monsoon. I kept it under the top drawer, where the handle stuck a little, and you had to pull with care. I told myself, whatever happens, never misplace this. I filled the rooms with simple things, white curtains that breathed in and out with the wind, a kettle that hissed like a cat when water reached its point. 2 cups, one for me, one for her. I wrote her name on a sticky note and hid it behind the mantel, a secret blessing I thought would protect us both. I gave her the best schools we could afford. I woke before dawn to iron her uniform until it lay smooth as calm water. I tied her shoelaces with fingers that still held the tremble of machines. I packed her lunch with the last of the fruit, keeping the smaller piece for myself. At night, I checked her homework and told her, "Your mind is a key. Keep it bright." The first red flag was small enough to feel like nothing. She brought a friend home, who wrinkled her nose at my curry, and said, "Your kind of cooking is too heavy." My daughter laughed, a quick, soft laugh that didn't defend me. I looked down at the pot and told myself not to be thin-skinned. I stirred the spoon and added a little more salt to hide the sting. Later there were bigger signs. She told me the villa needed better furniture, better art, better everything. She said everyone's parents are upgrading. You should too. I reminded her of tuition fees, of bills, of repairs. She rolled her eyes and said, "You worry like people who never had anything." The words slid into me like a cold blade. I tried to teach her dignity in small ways. Fix what can be fixed. Keep what can be kept. One evening, the glass top of the coffee table cracked from a careless elbow. I swept the shards into a dustpan. The light caught on the edges like frozen rain. Instead of throwing it away, I saved for a month and replaced the top. I wanted her to see that broken does not mean finished. Money drew a line between us. When she turned 18, I saved for her driving lessons and a used car. She called it ugly. She said she could not be seen in a car like that. She stayed angry for a week, doors closing a little too hard, banging like arguments that never started. I let her calm down, and then took her for a drive at sunset, the road warm and empty. I told her, "This car is on it." She looked out of the window and didn't answer. Then came a boy with a smooth tongue and a smooth watch. He said breeding matters. He said some families carry a certain shine. The first time he visited, he glanced at the framed certificate on the wall, my name on the deed, and smiled without warmth. He called our neighborhood humble in a way that sounded like an insult in silk. I served tea and watched him set the cup down, without a ring on the coast. I filed the detail away like a warning. She grew bolder. "You should put the villa in both our names," she said. "It's practical." I said, "Not yet." She said, "At least make me manager. It will be easier for me to handle things when you are busy." I wanted to give her trust. I also wanted to teach her wait. I allowed her to pay the staff once a month. I handed over small tasks, like changing a light contract or calling the gardener. She completed them well at first, and my chest warmed with pride. The world praises generosity until it eats you. A cousin needed a loan. I gave it. A neighbor's child needed books. I bought them. When my daughter wanted a new phone, I exchanged my old one for credit and gave her the better device. She said finally, and walked away smiling at the screen. I sat at the table and paid the utility bill with slower hands. I kept all the papers in that same top drawer. Warranties, tax slips, bank letters. If a letter arrived with my name misspelled, I corrected it and filed it again. I treated documents like armor. I knew too many stories of people who lost homes because the wrong paper went missing, drowned in a drawer, or burned in a careless fire. I also learned to burn the right things. On the day I finished paying the land loan, I took the old payment book to the backyard. The evening smelled of wet leaves. I lit a small fire in a metal tray and fed that book to the flames page by page. The paper curled and blackened, numbers turning to smoke. I watched ash lift into the sky and thought, this is what debt should do, pass away. I promised myself never to let a person become a new debt on my heart. As she grew older, her voice sharpened on the edges. She corrected my English at the dinner table. She told me not to serve tea to guests because my manners looked old-fashioned. The first time she said, "Your standards embarrass me," I stayed quiet and folded the napkin on my lap until the crease lay straight. After the guests left, I fixed the loose hinge on the kitchen cabinet with a tiny screw and a drop of oil. I needed the peace of repairing something I could control. The villa kept me steady. In the mornings, I opened the east windows and let light spill across the hall. Dust moved through it like slow gold. I walked room to room and touched walls the way a farmer touches the bark of his oldest tree. The smell of wax after polishing the floor, the click of the oven cooling, the rustle of the garden when the sprinklers finished. These sounds were proof I existed where I belonged. When she started working, I thought we had reached a balance. She came home in high heels that sounded like small hammers across the marble. She kissed my cheek and said she was too tired to talk, then disappeared into her room with the door closed. I told myself, this is youth, this is ambition, let her fly. I did not see the distance growing like a crack running under a rug. Then she took over certain decisions without asking. She changed the curtains, because they looked cheap. She told the maid to throw away the old photo frames. I found them near the trash, and rescued them, my fingers cold from the metal of the bin. I cleaned the glass, and put the frames back in the drawer, next to the file, where the edges of paper touched the edges of memory. One afternoon, I returned from the market, and found a designer label booklet, spread on the dining table, prices that made my head swim. She said the villa needed to look like the homes in that magazine. I asked, who are we trying to impress? She looked at me like I was slow and said, the right people. I asked, and who are the right people? She didn't answer. The silence said everything. I noticed another She began introducing the house as my villa at first, then our villa, then eventually as my place when her friends were around. She watched their eyes for approval as if collecting it in a hidden purse. Each time I heard it, I swallowed hard. I told myself, let it go. Words are just air. The deed is solid, but words can dig tunnels where solid things can be moved. I remember the day she persuaded me to sign an authorization letter to let her handle a repair. While I was out of town, the plumber needed it, she said. The association needed it. The paper looked harmless. A single sheet, my name printed clean. A polite line about access for maintenance. I signed, because trust is a habit you do not want to break. I placed a copy in the file and locked the drawer. The key felt warm in my hand. Something inside me cooled. She began hosting small gatherings when I was at work. I came home once to the smell of perfume, an expensive cologne hanging like fog in the hall. There were water rings on the table where coasters had been ignored, a lipstick stain on the crystal as thin as a She said, relax, this is what a villa is for. I washed the glasses myself that night, the sound of running water steadying my breath. The last good evening, before everything changed, was quiet. We sat on the steps and watched the sky go from gold to blue to ink. The garden smelled of jasmine. I told her how I bought the land, how I carried water, how I counted coins like prayers. She looked at the house and said, it must be nice to own something that big. I said, it is not nice, it is heavy, but it keeps the rain off. She smiled, but her eyes were somewhere else. After that, the red flags stopped being flags and became walls. Love without limits feeds entitlement. It began as whispers, light as smoke, but just as sting. I was at the market on a warm afternoon, the kind where the air smells of ripe mangoes and dust, when I heard two women speaking in that half-hidden way people do when they want to be overheard without being accused. They stood by the coriander stall, heads close, their bangles clinking softly as they chose bunches. They say the new owners of the villa threw another party last night, one murmured, peeling a wilted leaf from the bundle in her hand. Cars lined all the way down the road, the other added, her voice dipping into something almost like envy. A chef from the city, and music until past midnight. The words new owners cut through the air and found me. I was 2 steps away, pretending to examine tomatoes, my fingers sinking into their skin, until one gave under the pressure. I told myself, it couldn't be about my villa. I carried my groceries home, but the phrase wouldn't leave me. It followed me through the evening like a shadow at my back. The first change was so small I almost missed it. Our maid, who had worked for me for 12 years, began to avoid my eyes. She still came on time, still folded the laundry neatly, still swept every corner, but her hands moved a little too quickly when I entered a room. When she spoke, it was only in short answers. Yes, no, done. Then the gardener, a quiet man who had once sat with me in the evenings, sharing tea, mentioned almost offhandedly that the rose bushes at the front were being taken out. They said, they want more modern plants, he mumbled, glancing toward the house like someone watching for permission. I asked. He hesitated, then shook his head. I should get back to work. One morning, I found the day's mail stacked neatly on the front step. At least I thought it was mine, until I saw my name scratched out on half the envelopes. A bold, unfamiliar script had replaced it with hers. My daughter's name, confident, large, like she had signed a deed that already belonged to her. I told myself it was a mix-up, that she had ordered something in bulk, or redirected certain bills, but the letters kept coming, and the old ones with my name began to shrink in number. By now the whispers from the market had grown roots in my mind. I decided to see the villa myself. That morning, I pressed my clothes until the creases stood sharp. Not expensive clothes, just clean and carefully chosen. I wanted to walk in with dignity. I packed my old leather bag with the spare keys, my ID, and a few important papers. The sun was gentle, the sky pale blue, the kind of day that made the garden at the villa smell of jasmine and fresh-cut grass. As I drove up the hill, my chest felt tight, not from the climb, but from a weight I couldn't shake. Then I saw it. The gates I had chosen myself, simple black wrought iron, were now painted in a heavy glossy gold. In the center of each panel, where the metal used to curve like vines, there was a new emblem, her initials, twisted into a design so ornate, it looked like it had been stolen from a palace. A uniformed guard I had never seen before stepped forward, young, broad-shouldered, sunglasses hiding his eyes. His boots were new, the leather uncreased. He raised a hand, palm out. "You can't enter." I stopped the car and stepped out slowly. "I live here." He didn't blink. "Not anymore." The words hit harder than any shouted insult could have. Behind him, I could see movement on the veranda, people arranging flowers, setting trays with tall glasses. Music drifted from inside, low steady beats, that did not belong to my home. Then she appeared, my daughter. She stood at the top of the steps, her silk dress catching the sunlight, a glass of something pale and expensive in her hand. She looked directly at me, not with surprise, not with warmth, but with a calm readiness. "What is this?" I asked, my voice steady, even though my throat felt like it was lined with sand. Her lips curved into a smile that was all edge. "This is my villa now." I stepped closer to the gate. "I built this place, and now," she said, taking a sip from her glass, "I'm taking care of it. You can rest." Guests began to drift toward the scene, drawn like moths to the quiet fire between us. A man in a gray suit leaned toward a woman in a jeweled scarf, whispering something that made her eyes widen. The weight of their stares pressed into my skin, each glance like a needle. She turned to the guard without looking at me. "Give me the keys." He reached into his pocket. The small jingle of metal was louder than the music. I placed my hand on the gate, feeling the cool metal under my fingers. The gold paint was rough, uneven where it had been laid over the black. I could smell the faint sweetness of jasmine from the garden beyond, but it felt far away, as unreachable as a memory from another life. "You think this is yours because you changed the locks," I said, keeping my voice low. She tilted her head, her earrings flashed. "Because it is mine now." For a moment, the air between us was so still I could hear the flutter of the curtains in the upstairs window. My heart was loud in my ears, but my face did not change. Around us, the neighborhood kept moving. A boy rode past on a bicycle, his laughter ringing in the distance. A delivery van turned the corner. Birds argued in the branches above. But at this gate, time had stopped. I wanted to tell her everything at once, that she had crossed a line no one comes back from, that a home built with sacrifice can't be stolen without a fight. But the words stayed in my mouth. I saw, out of the corner of my eye, the neighbor's maid standing at the corner. "Watch." She would tell the whole street by nightfall. My humiliation was already halfway through the neighborhood. Then she turned, her heels tapping a steady rhythm against the stone steps. She didn't look back. The guard stepped forward and pushed the gate closed with a slow, deliberate motion. The latch clicked into place like a lock on a prison door. I stayed where I was, my hands still resting on the bars. My reflection stared back at me, warped by the metal's curve. Finally I let go. I walked back to my car, the laughter from inside chasing me down the hill. Every note burned into my ears, a reminder of the line she had crossed. They thought I was locked out, but I was already thinking of the top drawer in my desk, of the papers she had never touched. The cruel forget that paper can be sharper than any blade. I left the villa that day without a word, not in defeat, never that, but because I knew silence is a weapon when used in the right hands. The road down the hill felt longer than I remembered. Every step was measured, my bag heavy on my shoulder, not from weight, but from the pull of everything that had just happened. Behind me, the gate stood shut, the gold emblem glinting like a challenge. I went home and didn't turn on the light. The house felt colder than usual, shadows stretching long against the walls. I set my bag down and sat at the small desk in my bedroom, the same desk where, for years, I had planned every payment, signed every paper, counted every cost that built the villa. The desk drawer stuck like always,
catching halfway before giving way. My fingers brushed against the rough edges of old folders. Inside them lay my life's proof, property deeds, bank transfer receipts, tax slips, notarized agreements, and the original purchase contract for the land. I pulled the thick brown envelope containing the villa's ownership documents and placed it on the desk. The paper was warm from my hands, smelling faintly of ink and old leather. The title deed was there, clear, unaltered, my name etched into it with the permanence of law. I stared at it for a long time. No matter what tricks she played, no matter what strangers she stationed at the gate, she couldn't change this without my signature, and she would never get that. The next morning, I began my quiet work. I started with the bank statement. I spread them across the bed, page after page, each stamped with dates and amounts that told the story of every rupee spent on the villa. Payments to contractors, transfers to suppliers, withdrawals for building material, even the smallest purchase, curtain rods, cement bags, brass handles was there. Every paper was a thread, and together they formed a net strong enough to catch anyone who thought they could swim away with what was mine. I gathered receipts too, faded ones from early construction, crisp, newer ones for maintenance. I remembered each transaction, the hardware store that smelled of sawdust, the supplier who always wrapped items in old newspaper, the day I carried heavy paint cans myself because I refused to waste money on delivery fees. By the third day, my dining table had become an archive, neatly stacked files, labeled with sticky notes, a pen and notepad beside them, filled with names, dates, and small observations. I knew I couldn't move without legal backing, so I called someone I trusted, a lawyer I had worked with years ago when a neighbor tried to push our fence line. He was sharp, meticulous, and not easily intimidated. When I entered his office, the smell of old paper and polished wood hit me. Bookshelves lined the walls, filled with legal volumes, whose spines had faded under sunlight. He greeted me with a nod, motioning me to sit. I laid the documents on his desk one by one, explaining what had happened at the villa. He listened without interruption, his pen moving across a legal pad. When I finished, he leaned back, fingers steepled under his chin. She's managed to gain operational control, he said finally, but not legal ownership. He asked if I had signed anything recently, anything that could be twisted into granting her right. I told him about the maintenance authorization paper. His eyes narrowed. He pulled out a magnifying glass and studied my signature. Then he took another document I had signed years earlier and placed them side by side. The bottom of his mouth tight. She'd had someone alter the text after I signed it. The handwriting in the body was not mine, nor the original typeface. The paper had been amended to grant her broad powers, access to accounts, the right to represent me in association meetings, even the ability to hire or fire. But here's what she didn't have, he said, tapping the deed with the edge of his pen. This is the crown. Without this, she owns nothing. I felt a calmness settle over me. She thought she had won. She had taken the gates, the rooms, the staff, the man. But the heart of the villa, the legal right to call it hers, remained with me, locked away, untouchable. Still, my lawyer warned me to act carefully. People who think they have power often try to make it real by force. He suggested I secure the original somewhere she couldn't reach, not just the safe at home, but a bank vault. That afternoon, I went to the bank. The air inside was cool and smelled faintly of metal and ink. The manager, an old acquaintance, escorted me to the vault area. I placed the brown envelope inside a safety deposit box, slid the key into my pocket, and felt a new kind of strength. Now, even if she broke into my home, even if she tore apart every drawer, she would find nothing. With the documents secured, I turned to the next part of my plan. Gathering proof of her overreach, I began visiting the villa's neighbors, under simple pretexts, bringing them fruit from my garden, asking about local events. Each conversation gave me more pieces of the puzzle. One neighbor told me about a grand party she had thrown, introducing herself as the villa's owner. Another mentioned seeing new staff coming and going, none of whom knew my name. Someone else had heard her talking about renovations to make the place finally worthy of. I wrote it all down, noting the dates. Back at home, I contacted a friend who worked in the local land records office. Quietly, without raising suspicion, he checked for any recent activity on the villa's title. Nothing. My name still sat there, unmoved, That gave me breathing space, but it also confirmed something. She wasn't content with just living there. She wanted the paperwork too, and the longer she failed to get it, the more reckless she might become. In the evenings, I would sit at my desk with a cup of tea, the steam rising in thin threads. I'd look at the empty space where the brown envelope used to be, and remind myself, this was not a loss, this was a waiting game. I started rehearsing scenarios in my mind. The day she would be confronted, the exact words I would use, the timing, the audience, because humiliation is a powerful teacher, but only when there are witnesses. I was walking past the small cafe near my street when I overheard two young women talking. One was scrolling on her phone, showing the other a brightly colored image. The words, Villa, Ownership Celebration were printed across the top in bold letters. The date was 2 weeks away. The location, my villa. The guest list, from what I could see over her shoulder, included people from the city, local officials and business owners. I kept walking, my face calm, but my heart was already racing, not with fear but with precision. If she wanted to parade herself as the owner in front of everyone, then she would be giving me the perfect stage. A celebration is only as strong as the truth it's built on, and hers was about to crumble. The night I began taking back my villa, the air was heavy with the scent of rain-soaked earth. Clouds pressed low, muting the moonlight, casting the streets in a dim, secretive glow. It was the kind of night that asks for silence and rewards those who move in. I had spent weeks preparing for this. Every document, every witness, every quiet confirmation from my lawyer was now stacked in my favor like a wall she couldn't climb. The ownership celebration she had planned was less than a week away. That gave me just enough time to make sure she wouldn't be celebrating anything but her own downfall. Step 1 was legal. I returned to my lawyer's office with the final set of signed instructions. My ownership rights were already secure, but now I wanted every operational detail stripped from her hands. Bank access revoked. Staff contracts updated under my authority. All service agreements, electricity, water, security, shifted back into my name. It took hours of signatures, stamps, and formal notifications. Each paper slid across the desk felt like another brick sealing her out. My lawyer moved with quiet efficiency, calling in clerks, verifying details. When it was done, I walked out with a thick folder under my arm. Inside it was a simple truth. She could stand inside those walls, but from this moment on, nothing in that villa would move without my permission. Step 2 was physical access. I waited until she was out of I knew her movements now, not from guessing, but from the small web of information I'd built. Neighbors who saw her leave, staff who whispered her plans, a driver who owed me a favor. The locksmith arrived just after midnight, his van's engine cutting off with a soft rumble. He carried a small black case and spoke in low tones, his eyes flicking toward the road before we approached the gate. The gold-painted emblem still mocked me from the iron bars, but the sound of his tools clicking against the lock was like music. It took minutes, less than it had taken her to order the change in the first place. When the gate swung open under my hand, I stepped inside without hesitation. The villa greeted me like a wounded animal recognizing its owner. The air inside smelled faintly of lilies, hers not mine, and something else, the chemical tang of new polish on marble. The lights were off, but the moonlight slipped through the tall windows, throwing pale patterns across the floor. I walked slowly, my footsteps muted against the rugs I had chosen years ago. My hand grazed the wall as I passed, feeling the familiar cold smoothness of the paint. In her absence, the house felt both foreign and mine at once. The arrangement of the furniture was wrong, the art on the walls pretentious and out of place, but beneath it all the bones of my home were still here.
I went straight to the study. My old safe still sat in the corner, disguised as a filing cabinet. She had tried to replace some locks in the house, but not this one. Perhaps she didn't even know it existed. The key turned with a sound I had missed. Inside, I found more than I expected. My original copies of the villa's deed, the purchase contract, old blueprints marked with my handwriting, even the first photographs taken when construction began. I gathered them all into a single leather folder. These were the heartbeats of the villa. Without them, her claims were nothing but noise. The bank vault awaited. By morning, those documents were locked away in a place she could never touch. The vault was cold, the light inside sterile. I slid the folder onto the shelf, my fingers resting on it for a final moment before closing the metal door. The lock clicked, final and absolute. Walking out of the bank, I felt lighter. For the first time in weeks, the knot in my chest loosened. She could throw as many parties as she wanted. The core of the villa was no longer within her reach. They were the veins of the villa, carrying its daily life. Without them, her ownership would be nothing but empty room. I called each one to meet me at the cafe in town, far from her eyes. Some arrived hesitant, others relieved. They knew me, knew what I had built. And though loyalty is a fragile thing when money is involved, history has a weight of its own. I laid it out clearly. The villa was mine by law, and soon it would be mine in fact. Anyone who chose to stay under her orders would not be kept once I returned. Anyone who stepped back under my authority would be secured in their positions, with better pay. One by one, they agreed. Even the head of security, a man I thought she had turned completely, lowered his eyes and said he would rather work for the one who actually owned the place. By the end of the day, her staff was mine again. They just hadn't told her yet. I returned to the villa one last time before the celebration. It was night again, the air thick and still. The locksmith had given me a spare set of the new keys. Inside, I moved through the rooms with deliberate slowness. I touched the edges of tables, straightened a painting she had hung crooked. Every action was quiet, precise. In the upstairs office, the one she had claimed as hers, I found a small plaque on the desk. Her name engraved in silver, owner and director. I lifted it. It was heavier than it looked, cold against my palm. Without hesitation, I placed it in a bag and left the room. In its place, I set a small brass key on the desk. It was the first key to the villa's original front door, the one I had opened on the day we moved in. The message was clear. The real owner had returned. The invitations were already out. The guests already expecting a display of her supposed triumph. But I would be there too, and I wouldn't need to raise my voice, or push past anyone, or beg for entry. I would walk in through my own gate, with the law in my hands, and the truth at my back. She had taken the surface. I had reclaimed the foundation. And soon, the walls she had decorated so proudly would close in around her. The sweetest revenge is not to destroy what they built, but to take back what was yours all along. The day of her so-called ownership celebration arrived with the kind of brightness that feels sharp, almost mocking. The sun sat high in a cloudless sky, its heat glinting off every surface, making the gold paint on the villa's gates shine like a luminous. By noon, the road leading up the hill was already busy. Cars eased into position along the curb, sleek black sedans, polished SUVs, one or two flashy sports cars, whose engines purred like they knew they were being watched. Women in shimmering dresses stepped carefully out of back seats, their heels clicking on the pavement. Men in crisp suits adjusted their cuffs, their sunglasses reflecting the villa behind me. Yes, behind me, because this time I was already inside. I had come before dawn, unlocking my own gate with the keys I had legally reinstated into my possession. The air at that hour had been cool, still smelling faintly of night jasmine from the garden. I had walked the hallways slowly, checking every corner, every room. My staff, now mine again, moved quietly, following the instructions I'd given in our earlier secret meetings. The celebration was still going ahead, but the stage had shifted. A small wooden table sat beside me, covered with a neat cloth. On it lay the brown leather folder containing the original property deed, purchase contracts, and every supporting document, each page freshly notarized and marked with the official seal from just yesterday. Next to the folder, a single brass key gleamed under the sun, the first key to this villa's original front door. The security guards, my security guards, now stood at the gate, their posture calm but firm. I had given them one clear instruction: let no one in without my approval. By the time her car appeared at the bend in the road, the crowd had thickened. Guests milled outside the gates, talking in low voices, their expressions a mixture of confusion and expectation. Some were already glancing between me on the veranda and the locked gate, sensing that something wasn't right. Her driver stopped just short of the gates. She stepped out, draped in a deep red gown that caught the light in every movement. Her hair was pulled back into a sleek twist, her makeup precise. On her wrist, a gold bracelet glinted with each step toward the gate. She smiled, practiced, confident, as though she were walking into her own kingdom. She turned to them, her voice carrying easily over the murmuring crowd. "Open the gate." The head guard shook his head slightly. "We take orders from the legal owner." She straightened, a touch of impatience in her stance. "And I am the owner." His gaze didn't waver. "No, you are not." The crowd shifted. People leaned in, sensing the change in the air. She looked past the guards and saw me standing on the veranda. Her eyes narrowed, just for a fraction of a second, before she pulled the smile back onto her face. "Mother," she called, her tone lined with the kind of false sweetness meant to charm an audience. "There seems to be some confusion here." I stepped forward, each footstep deliberate, the marble under my shoes echoing faintly. I stopped just at the top of the steps, looking down at her over the curve of the driveway. "No confusion," I said. My voice carried, not loud but steady. "This villa is mine, by law, by paper, by every payment I made when you were still learning to write your name." A few gasps rippled through the crowd. Someone whispered too loudly, "Is she serious?" Her smile cracked. "Mother, this isn't the time or place. This is exactly the time I cut in. You gathered an audience. Let them hear the truth." Her cheeks flushed, not from the sun but from the heat of being cornered. I nodded to the guards and they stepped aside to let her approach, but only as far as the other side of the closed gate. We faced each other with the bars between us, the gold paint catching glints of sunlight like a mockery. "You locked me out of my own home," I said. "You told me I didn't belong here. You changed the locks, took the staff, spent money as if it was yours. And you thought because you stood behind these gates, you had won." Her chin lifted. "I took care of this place. I improved it. You took," I said sharply. And my voice carried enough weight that the murmuring outside stopped completely. "Taking care is not the same as take." I reached for the brown folder on the table beside me. The leather felt warm under my fingers as I opened it, lifting the top document. "This," I said, holding up the original deed so the nearest guests could see the seal and my name in clear print, "is the truth, signed, registered and untouched by your schemes." I handed it to the head guard, who walked it to the gate and held it up for everyone outside to see. The seal caught the sunlight, the ink still bold after all these years. "This villa was bought with my money, my labor, my years," I continued. "Every brick paid for in full. Every tile placed because I stood on this ground and made it happen. You have no claim, legal, moral or otherwise. You can't do this in front of everyone. I will do this in front of everyone," I said. "Because you tried to erase me in front of everyone." Her eyes darted to the crowd, reading their faces. A few avoided her gaze entirely. Others watched with quiet satisfaction, as if witnessing a balance finally restored. I turned to the guards. "The celebration is cancelled. No guest is to enter without my permission. And she," I pointed directly at her, "is not permitted past these gates, unless I say so." Her voice rose, tinged with desperation now. "You can't bar me from my own home." I took a slow step down the stairs, closing the distance to the gate. The bars cast shadows across both our faces. "This stopped being your home the moment you decided it would only be yours," I said softly, but with enough steel that she flinched. "A home is shared. A home is respected. You turned it into a trophy for your pride." Someone in the crowd murmured. "That's the truth." Another muttered. "She went too far." She grabbed the bars, her knuckles whitening. "You think you've won. This isn't over." I met her eyes, unblinking. "It's over when I lock the gate, and I'm locking it now." The head guard swung the gate closed with deliberate slowness. The latch slid into place, the metallic click ringing out like a gavel striking down a final verdict. She stepped back, the weight of the crowd's stares heavy on her. Her driver moved uncertainly beside her, clearly unsure if he should open the car door or wait for instruction. I turned, walking back up the steps to the veranda without another word. The marble was warm under my feet now, the sun's heat seeping through. Behind me I could hear her voice rising again, but the sound was swallowed by the buzz of whispers. The shifting of guests who knew the celebration they'd come for had turned into something else entirely, a lesson. Her party had been meant to crown her as the villa's queen. Instead it had stripped her title away in front of every person she had hoped to impress. And I wasn't done yet, because this was just the public beginning of her private fall. The loudest victories are the ones your enemies have to watch in silence. The morning after the confrontation, the villa was quiet in a way it hadn't been in months. Not silent, quiet, the kind of calm where every sound feels earned. The gate stood open, but not wide, just enough to let in the cool breath of early light. The gold paint on the emblem no longer caught my eye. I had stopped seeing it as a mark of her intrusion, and started seeing it as something I would eventually strip away. The staff moved with a steady rhythm again. No one hurried. No one avoided my eyes. In the kitchen, the kettle hummed, steam curling toward the ceiling. Somewhere outside, the gardener's shears clicked gently through overgrown hedges. I walked through the rooms at my own pace, barefoot on the marble I had chosen decades ago. My footsteps echoed softly, unchallenged. Her scent, sweet and sharp, still lingered faintly in some rooms, but it was already fading. I opened every window to let the air shift, to carry away the last traces of her reign. Curtains billowed in the breeze, like the villa itself was stretching after being locked too long. In the upstairs office, the desk she had claimed sat stripped of its false authority. The silver nameplate with her title was gone. In its place lay nothing but a smooth wooden surface, warm under my palm. I ran my fingers along the edge, remembering when I first placed this desk here, back when it held the brown leather folder like a treasure chest. I pulled open the drawer. Inside were the final reminders of her occupation, luxury catalogs, half-finished letters, a bottle of perfume lying on its side. I gathered them without comment, placing them in a box, not to keep, not to store, to remove. The hallway shelves still held photographs, but not the ones I had chosen. Framed images of her parties, her friends, her trips, snapshots of a life lived loudly and carelessly. I took them down one by one, replacing them with the photographs I had kept in storage. The villa under construction, my first day in the finished living room, her as a little girl laughing in the garden with juice staining her dress. Each photo I restored felt like another layer of my home returning. The master bedroom was harder. This was where the deepest memories lived, where every corner carried the weight of years. She had redecorated in cold tones, silver, glass, white, pretty to strangers, but without warmth. I opened the wardrobe and found clothes with tags still on them, things bought for show. I touched the fabrics briefly, soft, expensive, meaningless. They would be donated. In the nightstand I found a stack of unopened envelopes, addressed to me, redirected here after she took over. Bank statements, letters from old friends, even one from the land agent who had sold me this plot, sending a holiday card. She had kept them hidden, as if removing my mail could erase my presence. I stacked the letters neatly on the desk downstairs. I would read them later when the work of reclaiming was done. In the afternoon, I went outside to the garden. This was always my favorite part of the villa, the place where my mind quieted, where my body remembered the rhythm of planting, watering, waiting. The rose bushes by the gate had been pulled out, just as the gardener had told me months ago. In their place were ornamental plants, tall and strange, chosen for appearance rather than scent or life. I instructed the gardener to remove them. In the empty patch of soil, I knelt with a small sapling cradled in my hands. It was a neem tree, a gift from a neighbor who had heard about the celebration's abrupt ending. The earth was warm and soft as I pressed it around the roots. The scent of soil rose up, clean and ground. A neem tree grows slow but strong. Its shade lasts for generations. It felt right. That evening, I sat on the veranda with a cup of tea, watching the sky shift from gold to deep blue. The villa glowed in the fading light, its windows catching the last fire of the day. I thought about her not with the rawness of anger, but with the cool distance of someone who has learned. I had given her trust without limit, thinking blood alone was enough to bind loyalty. I had mistaken silence for peace, generosity for love. She had mistaken kindness for weakness, inheritance for entitlement. Some lessons cost more than money. I went inside and to my desk. From the locked drawer I took out my will. I had written it years ago when I still believed she would carry my legacy forward with honor. Now I took out a pen. The scratching sound on paper was steady, deliberate. I rewrote my terms in clear, unshakable language. No property to be transferred before my death. No rights without conditions met. A trustee to oversee everything, ensuring the villa and what I had built would never again be left vulnerable to ambition without gratitude. When I was done, I signed it in bold strokes. The ink sank deep into the fibers, permanent. Night settled over the villa. I walked through each room once more before bed,
not to check for intrusions, but to take in the space as mine again. The light switches clicked softly under my fingers. The air smelled of clean linen and fresh air. In the kitchen, I boiled water for one last cup of tea. The steam curled upward, catching the light from the small lamp above the sink. I carried the cup to the veranda and stood under the dark sky, the neem sapling just a shadow in the garden. It would grow. I would see it grow. Inside, I locked the main door, the key cool and certain in my palm. This time, there were no chains, no guards keeping me out, no one waiting to tell me I didn't belong. I turned off the lights, and the villa seemed to settle with me, its silence a shared breath. The peace wasn't loud, but it was complete. Some doors you lock to keep others out, some you lock to keep the right things in. Real family protects your home. They don't take it from you. If you've stayed with me until this moment, you already know every step I had to take to protect what was mine, not just in brick and stone, but in dignity and truth. Maybe you've never owned a villa. Maybe you've never held a deed in your hand or planted a tree in the soil of your own land. But betrayal is something almost everyone has tasted. It doesn't always come in the form of gold-painted gates and stolen keys. Sometimes it comes in smaller ways. When someone you trust takes advantage of your silence, when they assume your kindness means you won't fight back, when they mistake your open hands for empty ones. And when that happens, you have two choices. You can accept it and let them write the story of your life, or you can take the pen back. I chose to take mine back. I want you to remember something from my story, not just the confrontation, not just the moment the gate closed in her face. I want you to remember that before I acted, I planned. I gathered proof. I strengthened my position. I made sure that when I stood my ground, it wouldn't be shaken. Because revenge that comes from impulse can burn out fast, but revenge that comes from preparation, it lasts. If you're listening to me right now and you've felt a similar sting, maybe from a sibling, a child, a relative, or even a friend, know this: you are not alone. You are not overreacting, and you are not powerless, but you must protect what is yours. Not just the keys, not just the papers, your peace, your name, your worth. Too many people wait until everything is gone before they fight. Don't. Learn the signs early. Watch for the little red flags, the jokes that aren't jokes, the suggestions that sound harmless, the papers they want you to sign without reading. I hope my story gives you two things: a warning, and the courage to act when that warning comes. If you've been through something like this, I want to hear from you. Share your story in the comments. Tell me what they tried to take and how you stopped them, or how you wish you had. Your words might be the reason someone else sees the danger before it's too late. If you believe in protecting your dignity, in standing for what's right even when it's against your own blood, then share this video. Let others hear it, because silence protects the wrong people. I'll leave you with this: a home is more than walls. It's the place that holds your history, your sacrifices, your truth. It remembers every hand that built it, and it knows the difference between hands that protect and hands that plunder. Never let anyone rewrite that history while you're still here to defend. Subscribe if you want to hear more true stories like this. Stories of betrayal, justice, and the quiet strength that turns loss into victory. And if you've ever faced someone who thought they could take what was yours, this is your reminder. You can lock the gate, you can keep, and you can decide who steps inside. Because a real family protects your home, not take it from you.